Hello, thanks for stopping by again. Today I'm not 100 but only like 50 years late to the party of reviewing the RTX 2060 by NVIDIA, or at least it feels like it. The model I ordered just arrived a couple of days ago. So this is the ZOTAC RTX 2060 Twin Fan, basically the standard version. Do not mix it up with the higher clocked AMP edition, because on the outside those two variants look identical if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, this graphics card comes with 6GB of the new GDDR6 memory. At the time of shooting this video costs $350 US, and for the price we could be looking at something really impressive. Right off the bat, let me tell you, for those that can't live their lives without RGB lighting in it, well, you probably should look elsewhere then. This ZOTAC card doesn't have it. So could the RTX 2060 possibly be the new Full HD 1080p king? It very well could be, who knows? This time around we're looking at a not-so-beefy graphics card for once, compared to the previous RTX models I've looked at. This, however, does not mean there aren't gigantic 2060s out there. It for sure is an interesting design, but in terms of aesthetics, graphics cards by ZOTAC never really did it for me personally, but that is just a matter of preference. It doesn't look bad, you know? Kudos to ZOTAC for going with a backplate. That's what we really like seeing after all, but given the pricing of $350 in 2019, it's something we should expect, at least in my opinion. We are talking of the Ice Storm 2.0 cooler here. This one's equipped with 3 6mm thick heat pipes, a good amount of aluminum, and 2 90mm fans. However, while we're at it, please beware the fans. Just like on the RTX 2070 by Gainward that I've tested, the fans do not turn off at idle, something I find to be a real bummer. This for me kinda takes away a bit from the value here. In 2019, I would have hoped for a little bit more future, but then again, it's not the end of the world. Also, for those wondering, the backplate of course is out of metal, the shroud on the other hand is out of plastic. One thing's for sure, the card is compact, allowing installation into smaller form factor cases. And now some big red text: no RGB lighting. In fact, no lighting at all. Most of you guys probably would like me seeing comparing against a GTX 1070 Ti, but I have to disappoint you guys there. I only own a 1070 non-Ti. But don't be sad, you'll be surprised about the results. When doing a quick spec comparison, one thing most probably will notice right away is the lower amount of VRAM on the 2060. Yes, I do find this to be a bit of a bummer, but 6GB for $350, that still does sound okay actually. After all, a 1070 did cost more back when it launched. At least it's the new GDDR6 type of memory, a small consolation. The memory interface on the Turing model with its 192 bits seems a bit underwhelming. Something I wouldn't have expected is the 2060 to be yet another RTX card, a GPU with ray tracing. How well or if that really works with this card, you'll find out shortly. What makes this comparison of a 2060 against the 1070 quite interesting is the fact both have the same amount of shader units, 1,920 of those on both. And while I'm not completely sure about that, I think unlike with the RTX 2070, where in reality we've seen two different chip variants, it appears the 2060 has just one, but I could be wrong. But enough of my so-called wisdom, it's time for those benchmarks, so enjoy. So one thing I can say right away is the RTX 2060, at least in theory, is faster than the good old GTX 1070 we know and love by quite a bit. No questions, you're in a good spot in the gaming world with either the 1070 or 2060, especially when talking about full HD 1080p gaming. Still, it needs to be said, in certain game titles the 2060 does leave the 1070 behind by a good margin, something I expected, to be perfectly honest with you guys. What bothered me, however, was the fact the gap wasn't all that big, at least with the models I tested. Others speak of comparisons with the GTX 1070 Ti possibly getting beaten by the new RTX 2060. That's something I can't really imagine right now. But it sure needs to be said, I've never even had a 1070 Ti in my hands, so I can't say for sure how well such a card would do in my tests. But before the mood shift, let me tell you, the 2060 does show enormous performance in a couple of titles. In the new Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and Witcher 3, one could say there are worlds in between the 2060 and 1070. Could this be a driver optimization thing? It sure could be. In any case, games like Battlefield 5, Crysis 3, Doom, Far Cry 5, GTA 5, and Rise of the Tomb Raider, we don't see too impressive results. Or are my expectations simply too high? Am I maybe expecting some kind of performance wonder at $350? So before those brave internet warriors come after me with those pitchforks held up high, don't get me wrong, the performance you're getting for the price is excellent. It's just that I would have expected a tiny bit more FPS, especially since this is exactly the case in some games tested. Confusing are those results seen in Doom, but even Far Cry 5 and Rise of the Tomb Raider. We are partially talking of slightly lower 1% lows as on the 1070. Could the worse memory interface or VRAM capacity be at fault? Nah, definitely not the capacity. 6GB are enough, I did check that, and the interface can't really be it either, since some games, after all, do show great performance gains over the 1070. So for me, there's only one explanation that would make sense. It has to be a driver thing, I guess. But let's get to ray tracing real quick. Battlefield 5 supports this new feature, and it does look great, but the performance, at least with an RTX 2060, is a bit underwhelming at times. Without ray tracing, fantastic frame rates, with DXR set to low, playable at least at 1080p, but I didn't notice much of ray tracing anymore, and with DXR set to ultra, I wouldn't really speak of a playable experience, at least not for a first-person shooter. Temperatures and power consumption are looking good, even though the power draw appears to be a bit too high. While overclocking, I did notice that ZOTAC locked the power limit to 100%. I'm assuming they've already gone for a higher power limit, and it is already set in the BIOS, and that's what those 100% are for us users. The limit probably already is at its max by default. That's my theory, at least. I did some overclocking, and that's where I noticed some good performance gains without the power draw even growing. Does that confirm my theory? More on the whole overclocking subject in an upcoming video. At the end of the day, I can say the RTX 2060 Twin Fan by ZOTAC definitely is a very good gaming graphics card. For full HD 1080p, that's some excellent performance, in fact, but even at the WQHD 1440p resolution, you won't really run into any problems, as long as you're willing to reduce some graphics settings here and there. This graphics card doesn't deserve the best award, that's no surprise, and that's mainly due to ZOTAC's design choices, like the fans that do not turn off under light loads, and for not having any lighting on board, which could be a big no-no for many. Nonetheless, silver is a good and fair award in this case. And as always, thanks so much for watching.